New Year's Day should feel like a clean slate, but for South Los Angeles in 2007 it began with horror. In the early hours, a sanitation worker came across a black trash bag stuffed in a dumpster. What he found inside turned celebration into fear. The bag held the body of 25-year-old Janicia Peters, her life cut short and discarded like waste. At first, it looked like just another tragedy in a city filled with violence. But the evidence at that scene carried secrets. DNA that was matched to murders from the mid-1980s. Suddenly, detectives realized a serial predator had been hiding in plain sight, silent for decades, and now killing again. His name would soon echo across headlines: the Grim Sleeper. To understand why this one crime in 2007 shook detectives so deeply, we need to step back to the South Central streets of the 1980s. The crack epidemic was raging, murders soared, and women, many struggling with addiction, were barely noticed. They became invisible, and that invisibility gave the killer cover. Join us in Chapter 8 of the Grim Chapters as we dive into the horrific story of the Grim Sleeper. The story takes us back to August of 1985. The neighborhood of South Los Angeles was already heavy with the weight of drugs, gangs, and poverty. But something far darker was about to crawl into its shadows. On August 10th, the body of 29-year-old Deborah Jackson was discovered in an alley near 71st Street and Halldale Avenue. She had been shot 3 times in the chest with a small .25 caliber handgun. She was left abandoned, her life snuffed out. And yet in that moment, no one imagined that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. At the time, detectives treated it like just another isolated murder in a city drowning in violence. Then, in 1986, the nightmare repeated itself. On August 12th, 34-year-old Henrietta Wright was found beneath a discarded mattress in an alley. She had been sexually assaulted and killed with the same type of weapon, the same .25 caliber pistol. Her family called her Cody. She was a mother of 5 children, a woman with people who loved her, but in South Central during those years, her death blended into the background noise of too many other tragedies. Detectives noticed no shell casings at the scene, which meant she had been killed elsewhere and dumped in that lonely spot. Only a few months later, on January 10th, 1987, the killer struck again. This time it was 23-year-old Barbara Ware. Her body was dumped in an alley, casually discarded, and she too had been shot in the chest. In a strange twist, a 911 call came into police that night. A man's voice told dispatchers that someone had just dumped a body in the alley. He gave the description of a blue and white van and even part of a license plate number. But when dispatchers asked for his name, the caller refused.
Yes, I'd like to report a murder or a dead body or something.
Where at?
The address is 1346 East 56th Street in the alley. And the guy that dropped her off was driving a white and blue Dodge van. And, he threw her out. And the only thing that's hanging out of this, like he threw a gas tank on top of her, and the only thing you can see out is her feet.
Okay, what's your name?
Huh?
What's your name?
Oh, I don't stand anonymous. I know too many people. Okay then, bye-bye.
All right.
Looking back, detectives came to believe that the caller was the killer himself, taunting police while hiding in plain sight. The pace of the killings only quickened. On April 15th, 1987, 26-year-old Bernita Sparks was found stuffed inside a trash dumpster behind a church. She had been shot once in the chest. Just a few months later, on November 1st, 26-year-old Mary Lowe was discovered in an alley not far from where she'd last been seen leaving a club. She too had been shot. The same pattern, the same caliber of bullets, the same cold indifference. By this point, detectives were starting to see the outline of a pattern. The ballistics evidence confirmed it. The same .25 caliber handgun was being used again and again. Each body carried its own heartbreak, but together, they painted the picture of a predator who was hunting women in South Los Angeles, almost as if the streets were his hunting ground. Then came 1988, and with it, another tragedy. On September 11th, 30-year-old Lacrica Jefferson's body was found beneath a discarded mattress. A napkin was covering her face, and on it were the words AIDS written in lipstick. She too had been shot with the same weapon. That small, chilling detail, the lipstick, the message, hinted at a cruel, mocking personality behind the violence, someone who saw his victims as disposable and less than human. By the end of 1988, the tally was grim. 6 women confirmed dead, all African American, most struggling with drug addiction or survival sex work. All killed in almost the same way and dumped in alleys, dumpsters, or hidden corners of South Los Angeles. But despite the matching ballistics and repeating patterns, the city was drowning in so many murders that a year, more than 1,000 in Los Angeles alone, that the larger picture of a serial predator was lost. To many detectives, these cases blended into the overwhelming wave of killings sweeping through the city. And so, the man who would later be known as the Grim Sleeper kept moving quietly through those same streets, his gun in hand, his victims invisible, while the city failed to connect the dots. By 1988, detectives knew they were chasing a killer, but what they didn't have was a face. That changed the following year, when a young woman named Anitria Washington crossed paths with the man behind the violence. It was November of 1988 when she accepted a ride in an orange Ford Pinto. At first, the man behind the wheel seemed harmless, casual even. But before long, he veered away from where she asked to go, started calling her by another woman's name, and the air in that car turned heavy with menace. Then, without warning, he pulled out the same small handgun and shot her in the chest at point-blank range. Somehow, Anitria survived. She lost consciousness, but when she came to, she realized her clothes were disheveled, and the man had taken photographs of her as she bled. He drove off, leaving her for dead. But Anitria didn't give in. She staggered nearly a mile, leaving a trail of blood until she collapsed on a friend's porch where help finally came. Doctors removed the bullet, and when detectives asked her for a description, she recalled a short black man in a polo shirt and khakis, someone who looked ordinary, even forgettable. This description, along with the detail of the orange Ford Pinto, should have been a crucial break. But despite the survivor's courage and these haunting details, the case still drifted into silence, and the man responsible simply faded back into the city's shadows. After Anitria's survival in 1988, something strange happened. For nearly 2 decades, the killings that had terrified South Los Angeles seemed to stop. Detectives had already nicknamed the unknown predator the South Side Slayer, lumping his crimes with other unsolved murders in the area. But as the 1990s unfolded, no new victims appeared to match his pattern. From the outside, it looked like the killer had vanished. In truth, this is when he earned the name that would follow him forever: the Grim Sleeper. It seemed as though he had gone into hibernation. But silence doesn't always mean safety. The truth is, many women were still going missing in South Los Angeles during those years, their cases buried under the chaos of gang violence and the ongoing drug crisis. Some researchers believe the Grim Sleeper may have continued killing, but escaped detection. Others think his long pause reflected a man who simply grew more careful, changing how he chose his victims. For the families of the confirmed victims, the silence brought no comfort, only the painful knowledge that their daughters, sisters, and mothers had been forgotten. And for law enforcement, opportunities were slipping away as evidence sat in boxes, waiting for technology that had not yet arrived. For more than 10 years, people thought maybe the nightmare was over. The killings had stopped, and while the pain of the families never went away, the streets of South Los Angeles had gone quiet. But in 2002, that silence broke, and it broke hard. That year, 35-year-old Valerie McCorvey was found strangled in an alley. She wasn't shot like the women before her, but the brutality felt familiar. Detectives had that sinking feeling, though they didn't yet know just how deep this connection ran. Then in 2006, the horror came back again. 15-year-old Princess Bertomeu, just a kid, was found dead in another alley, not far from where earlier victims had been dumped. She too had been strangled, and this time DNA from her body linked back to the unsolved murders from the 1980s. The killer hadn't vanished. He'd just been sleeping. And then, on New Year's Day in 2007, the truth could no longer be ignored. Sanitation workers opened a dumpster and found a trash bag inside. Inside that bag was the body of 25-year-old Genesia Peters. She'd been shot and strangled, and the bag was sealed with a zip tie. That zip tie carried the killer's DNA, and it matched the old cases exactly. For detectives, it was like the ground shifted under their feet. After all these years, the grim sleeper had come back, leaving behind a trail that modern science could finally follow. The real story of how this case was solved isn't about sudden luck or someone talking. It's about the tiny things the killer thought no one would notice. Back in the 1980s, police kept finding the same kind of bullets, 25 caliber rounds fired from the same gun. That told them one person was behind many of the murders, but in those days, ballistics could only take them so far. They needed more. By the 2000s, that more came in the form of DNA. When investigators tested samples from Valerie McCorvey and Princess Bertomeu, the DNA was identical to what they had pulled from victims decades earlier. And with Genesia Peters, the evidence grew even stronger. The plastic zip tie that sealed her body in that trash bag had the killer's DNA on it, tying the past to the present in a way no one could deny. And then there was that strange 911 call back in 1987, when someone calmly reported Barbara Ware's body lying in an alley. The caller even gave part of a license plate from a blue and white van. At the time, it seemed like a helpful witness. Looking back, it felt more like the killer himself, taunting the police, placing himself just close enough to the action. Piece by piece, bullets, DNA, the zip tie, and even that eerie phone call stacked together. For the first time, detectives had a case that was finally moving forward. By the mid-2000s, detectives had the DNA. The problem was there was no direct match in any database. The killer had never been arrested for a serious enough crime to land his profile in the system. For years, it felt like the investigation had hit a wall. And then, something new changed everything. The science of familial DNA. Instead of looking for the killer himself, investigators started looking for close relatives whose DNA might be in the system. That's when a name surfaced. Christopher Franklin, arrested years earlier on a weapons charge. His DNA wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough to suggest a family connection. That connection pointed to his father, Lonnie Franklin Jr. Detectives began tailing him, watching the quiet, middle-aged man who lived on a normal residential street, a man who waved at neighbors and tinkered with cars in his driveway like any other guy on the block. But they needed proof. That's when a clever piece of police work sealed the deal. Detectives followed Lonnie to a pizza joint. After he finished eating, they grabbed the discarded crust and plate from the trash bin. In the lab, that DNA matched perfectly to the samples from the victims. After decades of hunting, the grim sleeper finally had a name. On July 7, 2010, the quiet life of Lonnie Franklin came crashing down. Police cars stormed into his neighborhood, and armed officers swarmed his South Los Angeles home. Neighbors poured into the street, stunned to see the man they knew, the guy who fixed cars and cracked jokes, being led away in handcuffs. Inside his house, detectives found a chilling treasure trove, hundreds of photographs of women, many of them unconscious, and personal belongings that could be tied back to victims. It was like the hidden world of a man who had fooled everyone was suddenly exposed. In interrogation, Franklin sat stone-faced. He denied everything, claiming he was innocent, but the DNA told a different story. For the detectives who had waited decades, there was no longer any doubt.
This young lady, Deborah Jackson. So if I told you you were connected to the deaths of all of these ladies, who do you think the Detective Kilcoyne and I would be sitting here looking at. Huh? You don't know who we'd be looking at?
Oh, okay. You looking at me? You looking at me?
I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. Yes.
I mean, all of these people that you say you don't know, through scientific evidence, are all pointing the finger at Lonnie David Franklin Jr. Sit there and look at their faces, all staring at you, pointing that finger at you.
The grim sleeper had been hiding in plain sight all along, living just like any ordinary man next door. By the time Lonnie Franklin finally stood trial in 2016, people had been waiting decades for this moment. Families who had carried grief for half their lives finally got to sit in a courtroom and look at the man accused of tearing their world apart. The prosecutors didn't come in with guesses or half-built theories. They had a mountain of evidence. DNA that tied Franklin to bodies decades apart. Bullets from the same .25 caliber gun. And maybe most haunting of all, those hundreds of photos found in his home. Women in vulnerable positions, many still unidentified. Then came the testimony. Survivors like Anitria Washington took the stand, telling the jury how she was shot, photographed, and left for dead. Her words painted a picture no one could forget. The defense tried to argue contamination. They tried to suggest mistakes, but the science was too strong. The pattern was too clear. After months of testimony and weeks of deliberation, the jury came back, guilty on 10 counts of murder and attempted murder. The judge handed down a death sentence. And just like that, the grim sleeper, the faceless terror of Los Angeles, was unmasked for good. But here's the thing about cases like this. Even a guilty verdict doesn't tie everything up neatly. Families of other missing women were left wondering if their daughters, sisters, or mothers were also victims. And those photos in Franklin's collection, some showing women who've never been identified, left behind shadows of even more possible crimes. Then in March of 2020, the story took another turn. Correctional officers found Lonnie Franklin dead in his cell. Officials said it was natural causes, but after everything, people couldn't help but question it. Just like that, the chance for him to ever admit to more killings, to ever give closure to those families, was gone forever. For some, his death was a relief. For others, it was another cruel ending to a story filled with unfinished answers. In South Los Angeles, the name Grim Sleeper still carries weight. For years, his victims were ignored, written off, or overlooked because they were poor, vulnerable, and living in neighborhoods already struggling with drugs and violence. Families felt invisible, and that pain still lingers. But what also lingers is their fight. Mothers, sisters, and activists refused to let the world look away. And eventually, their persistence forced justice to catch up. That's the legacy here. Not just the horror of a man who hid in plain sight, but the strength of a community that refused to stay silent. Thank you for watching this chapter to the end. Please share your thoughts about this tragic story in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts. If you are new to the channel and would like more true crime stories like this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next chapter.